For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Steve Weichel, Head of Industry Relations for the MIT Center for Real Estate and a Mesred alum from the class of 2008. Welcome to this year's virtual MIT World Real Estate Forum. I'm pleased to report that there are nearly 350 people registered this year from around the world, and we're honored to have a distinguished lineup of more than 35 speakers. That's industry thought leaders, MIT faculty, researchers, MIT alumni, inventors, and innovators. They're all here to share in what is always an insightful and lively discussion about the future of real estate. I'd especially like to welcome the attendees who are participating in the SEO Career Program, which helps Black, Latinx, and Native American college students secure internships with organizations throughout the United States. This year, SEO launched an initiative focused specifically on placements in real estate firms, and we're pleased to have those students with us at the forum. Of course, an event like this wouldn't be possible without our event partners, JLL, who helped underwrite the forum, our media partners, CRE Tech, PropTech Latin America Connection, and Asia PropTech, and our presenting partners at IREM and AFIRE. The forum also requires an army of people just to put it together. I'd like to thank our great team at the Center for Real Estate, Lisa Toma, Tim Lemp, Fiona Farzan, Kelly Cameron, Tricia Nesty, Cheryl Gillespie, Aaron Glennon, Lindsay Goodwin, and Lacey Cochran. And also the incredible team here at Giro Studios, Giro and Felicia and the rest of the team. Thank you for your help. Of course, a thank you to all of our speakers, the faculty, the researchers who keep these incredible ideas coming through our doors. Earlier today, we learned about real estate in virtual worlds. We talked about new technology for real estate finance, and we got an update on MIT's new tech tracker. It was a really enlightening and exciting day. Tonight, we continue the technology journey, and we'll begin by talking about data and analytics and how we can use that to better understand the built environment. I'm really pleased to have with us Dr. Daryl Fairweather, the chief economist at Redfin, and Dr. Parag Khanna, best-selling author and founder of climate analytics firm ClimateAlpha. Both Daryl and Parag are experts in a variety of topics, but I invited them here today to help us better understand some of the macro issues around climate related to migration and urban growth patterns, and also how they're applying data and analytics to understand this. They're each going to take a few minutes to share their latest work, to frame the conversation, and then we'll dive into the discussion and also take your questions. So Daryl and Parag, welcome. Nice to see you. Daryl and I are here in the US, Parag's in Singapore, so he's half a day ahead of us. So anyway, good to see you. So Parag, do you want to start and give us some kind of quick global perspective, and then we'll come back to Daryl and talk about the US?
Absolutely, I'd love to, Steve. Thanks so much for inviting me again. And I guess I should say again, one way to measure time is simply time zones. Another is how many global MIT real estate forums have you done during the pandemic? And this would be the second, I believe. But let's hope the third can be, virtual has its merits, but I look forward to seeing you again in person as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here. And let me take just a couple of minutes to kick off the conversation, perhaps from the perspective of computational spatial science and climatology, and what it's telling us about time in the much larger, grander scheme, of course, which is epochal time and the impact of current man-made induced climate change on our likely climate niche in the latitudes of most suitable for human habitation. And some of you will be familiar with this map that's just been released quite recently by NASA and the National Academy of Sciences that's been looking at that shift in the optimal climate niche, or more precisely, the variation in suitability for habitation over time. So green becomes more suitable, red becomes less suitable than it presently is, which is not to say completely unsuitable, but certainly trending in that direction. Now, we can debate if we like, how far it is until this date. But in fact, this is a gradual process, as we know. Even despite the pandemic, even despite emissions temporarily being reduced, we know that we're in a way back to our old selves. And even all of the commitments, all of the investments that are being made in mitigation, that are being debated at the various climate summits that will be center on the agenda at COP26 coming up, don't address enough adaptation. And I believe adaptation is a priority that should have equal merit and perhaps should have starting yesterday.
It's already in the refrigerator on the right. It's a new rosé that we just got delivered.
So it's dinner time somewhere. Now, so let's talk about what what adaptation means in the context of real estate. It is, of course, optimizing that geography that remains livable, if you will. If we focus again globally, it's almost unquantifiable. The extent to which meteorological phenomena have had damage on our built environment, but even in just North America, you know the Swiss figure on $105 billion worth of insurance, and then the risk and what that means in a likelihood for climate migration. Another way to look at it is some of you seen climate impacts economic damage assessment of order effects and third order effects of rising temperatures on the GDP of locations. And they've tried, to their credit, to weave in not only rising temperatures, flood risk, coastal erosion, but then the impact that has on business investment, even on some of course are much of the Southeast is at risk in various ways, but even of course some of our principal economic centers of gravity, which happen to be coastal cities, are at risk as well of significant GDP loss and erosion over time. That may well be compounded. I don't believe that methodology, for example, sufficiently takes into account the impact of shifting populations, and it can be so. If we, for example, geolocate the climate niche as it applies to North America, we do see it shifting northward considerably. And of course, what's so interesting, and Daryl will tell us about this as well, is that some of the states here that are in that accented, elevated green area are still some of those states that are actually losing more people than they are gaining right now, even though they are what we would call America's, if you will, climate oases. Now, we're also looking, of course, at fiscal spending patterns. This isn't just about climate. Suitability and livability are about so many other things that prop tech companies and many other actors and agencies measure. But one of the key things that one would have hoped for is to consider whether or not the United States would experience a broad-based adaptation would be the extent to which the infrastructure plan and the Green New Deal genuinely put up the kind of capital at a national scale calibrated to the needs of specific states or regions in the United States. Now, of course, we've been learning, and I'm sure many of us are disappointed, the fiscal spending that's being negotiated right now in the infrastructure plan is rather versus the estimates that are put forward and that are required based up. So we're looking at really a fraction of the necessary capital outlay over the short, medium, and long term. And what that means, therefore, is that we might continue to see a sort of inward drift, what you might even call a continental drift within the United States, in which really subregions or collections of states are going to really be not on their own. I think that would be too extreme a term. It's going to be more about sub-regional efforts to develop the kinds of adaptation policies, states coming together around certain kinds of fiscal collaboration. But the national impetus might be there in terms of the bully pulpit of the Biden administration, but not there in terms of how that translates from the federal level onto the ground. So we're going to see adaptation occur at a regional level and these regional adjustments. The final point I'd make is to bring it back to the global level again, which is to think continentally. Because when you study human geography, as we do, and look at the future migration patterns, a few things have to be noted. All of this is transpiring as the world population is actually plateauing. And plateauing from the 8 billion today to perhaps a maximum of 9 billion people. And the demographic imbalances that are inherent in the Northern Hemisphere, including North America, Europe, and elsewhere, are becoming ever more acute with the mortality of baby boomers and the tensions over immigration. And when we think about this from a regional level, we realize that, well, actually, even as we have the climatological issues, we also have to think about the demographics, the tax base, immigration, and the geography of where people will want to live. And that requires thinking beyond just, the administrative boundaries of the continental United States and even the US-Canada border, to think about how we're going to have a more functional geography of shared infrastructure, water resources, energy, and suitable habitats, and the flows of people across boundaries. So this is not just a matter of, the immediate refugee crisis on the US-Mexico border. It's something much grander about identifying the geographies where we can pre-design is the term that I like to use, pre-design based upon what we know about the geographies most suitable for habitation, the kinds of sustainable habitats that can absorb more of the inevitable flows of so-called climate migrants. So let me just stop right there and pass it back to you, Steve. Thank you.
Parag, thank you. And also thanks for reminding us that you are on the short list of people who have been at both forums in a COVID environment. So anyway, thank you for that. Daryl, I'll turn it over to you to share. I know you've been doing some great work on understanding mobility of people within the United States and where they're living and where they're buying and what their sentiment is. So I'll turn it over to you and you can share some of that work with us.
Great. So my name is Daryl Fairweather. I'm the chief economist at Redfin. We recently did a survey to people who are moving or planning to move, and we asked them about how they think about climate change. And we found that 1 in 5 Americans believe climate change is already impacting their home values. 21% said that it's already negatively impacting home values. Some people think it's going to happen in the next 5 years. A good 35% said that it won't happen until the future, but still a large number of people think that climate change is real and it's impacting their own home value personally. But there is this cognitive dissonance happening. It's not showing up in home values just yet. Younger generations are more likely to say that climate change is impacting home values in their area. Makes sense just from a political perspective, and also the fact that younger people are going to feel climate change more in their lifetimes than older generations. And 1 in 5 homeowners have invested to protect themselves against extreme temperatures, flooding, against climate risk. I talked about how climate change, people realize that it's real. At the same time, people are moving across the country, and I'll show you in a bit how it's not really matching up to their stated beliefs about climate change. So more Americans started migrating since the beginning of the pandemic. It went from about 26% of Redfin users searching for a home outside of their metro area to now being 31%. So a pretty substantial increase, and it seems to be holding steady since the beginning of the pandemic. The places that they're moving to, though, are places that aren't necessarily climate resilient. So New York is one of the places that people are leaving from the most, and these New Yorkers are heading to the south. They're heading to Florida, clearly not the most climate resistant area. They're going to generally the southeast. The people leaving the Bay Area, which is another big source of migrants, they are moving to the south as well. Arizona, Texas, Las Vegas, places that are going to have water problems in the future. So on the one hand, we have Americans saying that climate change is real and impacting their home values. On the other hand, people are moving to areas that are going to have serious problems as climate change becomes more and more of a part of reality. Another thing we looked at was how much are home values going up in areas with high flood risk versus low flood risk. And believe it or not, home values are actually rising faster in the areas that have high flood risk. Part of this is that areas that have high flood risk also tend to have luxury homes. Think of coastal homes, for example. So here are homes in Jacksonville, Florida. You can see here both the flood risk and the home values. And if you look along the coast, you can see that those are some of the areas that have the highest flood risk and also the highest home values. The way that we react to climate change is definitely going to differ by, unfortunately, the value of real estate where the impacts are happening. In a place like Jacksonville, there's going to be a lot of money behind preserving real estate values because the real estate where flood risk is high is very valuable. In Sacramento, however, it's an opposite story. The areas that have the highest flood risk are areas that were historically redlined. Redlining was a practice before the civil rights era where home loans were not given to Black neighborhoods. And they still tend to track with Black neighborhoods today. And in Sacramento, most of these neighborhoods that were redlined that are Black still to this day have the highest flood risk. And we're going to have to grapple with that. How do we ensure that it's not only the highest real estate values that are protected? What do we do with real estate values that maybe not be as valuable, maybe have been historically discriminated against, and again face this added burden of climate change and flood risk? So that kind of gives you the big picture of what is happening with climate change right now and how we may react to it. And I'm looking forward to some of the discussion we're about to have.
Thank you, Daryl. I appreciate that. We'll bring Parag back in as well. So really interesting observation of what's going on. It can be a little scary. I realize you deal with this all the time. But Daryl, did you have? I know that Redfin is mostly involved on the residential side, but can you draw any conclusions on how this might impact commercial as well?
Yes. So I think the point I brought up about how some real estate is very valuable in areas that are going to see more climate change damage. And some areas have very low home property values. And I think that's true in commercial space as well. If you think about an area like Lower Manhattan that is at sea level and is already experiencing a lot of flooding, I can see in the future that real estate is going to be protected. It has a lot of high value both commercial and residential real estate there. Mm-hmm. That's my prediction. I would hope that we don't just only protect the real estate or the people that have the highest wealth, but I think that's something that we're going to have to grapple with, is who actually pays for climate damage? Is it local? And if it's local, it's just going to be the rich areas that are able to protect themselves, or is it more something that the federal government will step in and make sure everybody's protected against, whether it's high value commercial real estate or low value residential or other real estate?
Daryl, you alluded to it. The migration is moving to, and Parag, you did as well. People are moving to where they shouldn't be. If you look at those maps, they're really moving where they shouldn't be. And frankly, commercial real estate development also is moving to those areas. Do you have any sense why that might be, other than strange human behavior where we sometimes do things that are against interest? Either of you? I don't know.
I can speak to it a little bit. I mean, a big thing on the residential side is affordability.
Right.
So Phoenix is much more affordable than Los Angeles. Austin is more affordable in the Bay Area. I think for the most part, the corporations are kind of following where the talent is going. Mm-hmm. So that's why, I mean, all the tech workers decide to move to Austin, Apple's going to follow them, Google's going to follow them, especially if they want them to be in person.
Right.
So yeah, it's really just comes down to, I think, dollars, at least in the present. I don't think people are as good about thinking and predicting the long-term cost of how much is water going to cost there in the future, how much is it going to cost to make those places more resilient.
Yeah. Parag, what about major cities around the world that are clearly at risk, except institutional money still builds there and buys there?
And indeed, the pattern might be quite similar to the United States in some places, though, of course, it's not apples to apples, because in other countries, there's higher degree of political risk and other variables that intervene and shape movements. Take, for example, Hong Kong, obviously, where people are not thinking about climate right now, but obviously thinking about the geopolitics, and other places. And of course, there isn't as much institutional capital. In Europe is the only comparable region in terms of that, or Japan as well, of course. But there in Japan, you would factor in demographic issues much more strongly, because it's a large economy with a shrinking population. Now, I mean, some would forecast that the United States is heading in that direction. And based upon relative demographic performance, historically, the U.S. is not as healthy demographically as it has been. But unlike Japan, the U.S. can change course on that very, very quickly, mm-hmm. and is starting to do so through what the Biden administration is doing. So very, very hard to compare these things. What I would point to as a follow-on to what Daryl has said is that we could start to see more of a divergence from how the commercial asset class versus the residential asset class performs, due to talent not only congregating in areas where larger cities and therefore commercial real estate following or leading that and populations building up. But the more remote work you can have, and the more simultaneously the residential side invests in more affordable housing in areas that are in more climate propitious areas, lower cost areas, you won't necessarily see commercial asset prices grow in those areas, because people there don't necessarily want to go to offices. And obviously the PSF is going to be lower anyway. in Boise, Idaho than in Dallas, Texas.
Right.
But that said, the residential market could start to swing because those are resilient areas where citizens want to make a long-term commitment to reside and build new communities. Right. And so again, I think that divergence is going to be something very interesting to watch. It's something that we're trying to model.
Yeah, you mentioned the talent. Both of you mentioned talent, and so I'm wondering what your take is on COVID. I realize, on the one hand, we have immense amounts of data to understand. We'll try to understand what happened for the last 18 months. At the same time, it's a very short window in the whole scheme of things. Did COVID just reveal what was already going on? Did it accelerate it? And how, on the other side, now that we have these fluid labor markets that potentially are globally fluid labor markets, how might that change these growth patterns? I'll let Daryl take that one first, because I know you've been following it closely, and then Parag, we'll come back and talk about kind of the global flows of labor.
Sure. So as I showed in my slides, we're tracking migration for home buyers, and it ticked up quite a bit from 26% to 31% during the pandemic, and it seems to be holding steady. I expect this pattern of people moving to more far-flung suburbs or to more affordable cities to remain very popular. People just now are getting notice from their employers about what exactly their work policy is going to be. At Redfin, for example, we announced that everybody can come in only 2 days a week if they want. They can come in more if they want to. And if you want to work remotely full time, you just have to ask your manager, but we're pretty open to it. And I think a lot of people are getting that notice and now making the move that they weren't really ready to make at the beginning of the pandemic, when they thought that remote work might have been only temporary. As people move out to the suburbs, especially in places like California or the West, really, Salt Lake City, they're moving more into wildfire-prone areas. The city centers tend to be pretty resilient, especially in California on the coast. When they move into central California or from Seattle to eastern Washington, the wildfire risk gets much more dramatic. So that's not a good trend, that people are seeking out these more affordable areas, at least in the short term. Maybe they'll be more expensive when fire insurance premiums go up or when they have to make their homes more resilient.
Yeah. Also, Daryl, you mentioned the role of PPP when we were talking. You think PPP might have even accelerated these or extended this trend?
So I think that in general, the stimulus that was given out during the pandemic has given people more opportunities to pursue things that they wouldn't have pursued otherwise. So whether that's unemployment insurance, it gave people a longer sabbatical to find a new job. PPP, maybe some people were able to change their businesses in ways that they would have considered before. I think that we're going to see a lot of, I expect to see a lot of growth in the economy moving forward, just because there's just so much pent up demand and pent up kind of innovation that's going to be unleashed.
Right. Parag, digital nomads. We had nomads before COVID, and then suddenly everybody became a nomad, right?
Indeed. Well, we are a nomadic species, actually, if you go back 100,000 years, up until actually the relatively recent arc of human history. But let me talk about the other PPP, purchasing power parity, because that's the one I think that's going to have obviously the bigger long-term impact. And this is another one of the issues that actually we did see in terms of nomads before the pandemic. You know, the quotient or, you know, number of workers.
We lost Parag for a moment.
In digital.
Hey, Parag, can you repeat that?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Can you repeat that for us? We lost a little bit of that. You were breaking up. Can you just repeat the setup for us?
Absolutely. I was saying that over the last 8 to 10 years, I've spoken with a number of executives in Silicon Valley who were talking about how difficult it was to convince young talent, graduates with computer science degrees, to move to the Bay Area because they knew how expensive it was, and they preferred to choose, we would call them second-tier areas, just cheaper cost of living. And I do think that we need a better cost of living index. We tend to focus on inflation, variables and so forth. But there's for a young person, they're not necessarily at the price of a basket of goods that includes fuel. They're looking more at what is the state tax rate, city tax rate, what is the median home price, and what is the income that they're going to get. And this is the following is a very bespoke issue, but is your salary going to be adjusted by your employer based on your location? Because employers, not just employees, are looking at the cost of living. And that's where the international dimension comes in. And I'm a big fan of this sort of global nomadism, because it really is push and pull. The number of countries that had these so-called nomad visa programs numbered, on one hand, you could count them, the Estonias of the world pre-pandemic, and now it is about 60 plus countries.
Wow.
So the digitization of migration, post-COVID in terms of, having blockchain portals for your data, doing faster digital clearance of entry, and even having tax-free schemes, of course, to attract young people simply to invest in your economy by way of becoming a renter. And I can literally name you dozens and dozens and dozens of countries that are doing this. And remember, again, it comes down to this finite pool of young, globally mobile talent, right? It's not infinite, it's finite. So it's therefore a tug of war, and the winning countries or cities will be those places that are doing the most to roll out the red carpet for them. And even then, loyalty will not necessarily be requited, in the sense that people will show up in one place, then move to another place, and move to another place as their mood suits them, or as conditions, again, according to sort of PPP, improve elsewhere. And that's what we're dealing with right now, is a globally nomad digital cast of people who are the ones with the savings and who want to stretch that income as far as possible.
So that's really great. Thank you for that. So it's not just climate. If you're a real estate person, if you're a real estate professional, it's not just about trying to understand where kind of modeling the climate risk. We've also got this global workforce. I don't want to call it risk, but there's this element of the global workforce in the future as they come up through the ranks that might also influence my decision on where to build and what to build, if I'm hearing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just one other thing on that is sort of, trends versus patterns. So the pattern that we're seeing in the US in terms of people feeling more, capable to be remote and potentially even sort of de-urbanizing or deconcentrating from tier one expensive, cities, that's not actually what's going to be the case in much of the rest of the world, just to be clear. You will see a little bit less of it in Europe than in the US. The US is more dynamic and is going to embrace these things faster. But let's bear in mind that, the majority of the human population is, east of Suez, as the saying goes, from British colonial parlance. And so we're talking about Asia. And in Asia, the quality of life differential between a second tier or rural area and a city is enormous, right? It's as big a deal as moving internationally across hemispheres. So young Asians are still going to gravitate towards large cities because the internet bandwidth is better, the quality of life is better, healthcare is better, education is better, all of those other things. So, in that sense, we need to look maybe regionally in order to answer the question better.
Right. Well, that I hadn't considered that. That's different culturally. Daryl, you're seeing cultural differences within the United States, but I hadn't considered these dramatic cultural differences. Parag, how about Latin America? How might that look different than Asia?
Well, there, I think so. South America, in particular, is already the most urbanized continent of the world. By far, like 94% of the South American population lives in cities, and most of the population is, of course, in coastal areas, owing to the Andes Mountains and the Amazon rainforest. So only the Arab world as a region, the Arab world is not a continent, of course. So, but similar rates of urbanization, which is already basically peak. Basically everyone lives in a city. The question is which cities. And there, of course, you do have to take into account the climate variables because of drought, because of desertification in some areas, flood risk in others, wildfires, coastal erosion, and so forth. So in South America, really everything is hitting at once because they also have had very poor counter-cyclical fiscal policy. So, commodities exporters have not invested in economic diversification and social spending and affordable housing when the going has been good. And now the going is not good, and it's not going to be good, quite frankly, for a very long time in South America, to be honest. I could go on for much longer, but basically people will be, there is not a coherent regional migration accord, and there aren't countries where you could say that they are either very populous or could absorb larger populations and provide, safe and productive habitats. Literally, there's no country that would tick both of those boxes at the same time anywhere in South America right now.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that Daryl said. Daryl, you compared the two cities. It was Jacksonville and was it
Sacramento.
Sacramento, yeah. So, and they have two very different kind of. The data shows a very different kind of situation there. From a defensive standpoint, what if we have to relocate some of the neighborhoods? And I realize this was very controversial after Katrina. This idea that this neighborhood's always going to be at risk. It's always going to be dangerous and risky for you to live here. Let's just move your neighborhood. And I realize there are a lot of complications to that. But is that a solution, Daryl, or not?
I think it has to be on the table at least. I mean, there are definitely going to be some areas where it just doesn't make sense to rebuild. Like Paradise, California, it was completely burnt down just 2 years ago, and there are already developers there looking to build again, and the land is cheap. I don't think that that's sustainable, and eventually the fire insurance premiums are just going to be too high, and then these flooded areas, there are going to be issues there as well. Another thing to consider is that if private citizens or private developers decide to make a building more resilient, that's costly, and it's going to be something that is a luxury. Only certain people are being able to afford to use that space either residentially or commercially. So the places that we decide to keep, even though they are at risk, are going to be only really accessible to wealthy people unless we have like some kind of redistribution. So we have to figure it out, and I think relocation should definitely be on the table when it doesn't make sense when it isn't really feasible to make an area more resilient.
Yeah. And how about
and if I could
go ahead, Parag.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you allow me to play, push the envelope a little bit and play kind of, a relocation czar. We are talking about our taxpayer money here, and I think what we're already seeing, if you look at the Florida Keys or the coastal Carolinas, the verdict is coming in that if you want to stay there, it's got to be your own money. But the sort of, at least I think what the sort of generosity that may be playing out is that the handout to people whose homes have been destroyed as a relocation allowance is rising, and I think that is what needs to be done. But we need to encourage people a bit more forthrightly, to simply move, because inevitably there is a public cost to simply doubling down on unlivable geographies. And I, quite frankly, both as an analyst who wants to see, or an advocate of a more productive, citizenry and labor force, and as a taxpayer, quite frankly, that we're being, strong enough about that, because that is why we have these geographical models that tell us where we can or should or should not live.
So you mentioned an example of an incentive. Daryl, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that there are some things that we do that actually make it harder to relocate that I'm seeing some signs changing. So the Biden administration, for example, is going to push on the FTC to ban burdensome licensing agreements. So you can't right now it's hard to be a barber in one state and move to another state. You have to get relicensed, or an electrician. That we should get rid of to at least make it easier for people to choose to relocate, and then giving incentives, payments. I think that is definitely a smart thing to do when a community isn't able to be rebuilt.
So Daryl, it's not always about the real estate, I think is what you're saying. There are other incentives that are maybe not necessarily tied directly to the real estate that would have people agree to relocate. I think. Parag, you mentioned mobile real estate. What's mobile real estate?
Yes. I was kind of surprised as someone who's not from the real estate.
Parag, we'll come back to you in a moment. We lost you for just a moment. We'll come back to you in a moment. Daryl, so incentives. Are you back? Are you back, Parag?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you now. Okay, so mobile real estate.
Yes. I was surprised that I had coined that term, but I'm glad I did. Because one of the things we are seeing demographically, and I'm not sure if this would pop up in Redfin data, but it is elsewhere, around the number of people who are buying mobile homes. And during the pandemic, sales of mobile homes actually went through the roof. And I actually think, I think there's something deeper here. I actually think that this is part of a human survival mechanism. It's fight or flight. I actually think, mobile homes such as we know them in the 21st century with a Starlink, satellite dish on top, although you can get arrested right now for that. So Starlink satellite dishes are not allowed to be attached to the roof of cars yet. This is maybe one of these licensing issues we should look at. But, the mobility of young people, again, we're looking at smaller family sizes. This we all know. We're looking at young, unmarried, single professionals, and especially if they are not necessarily remote workers, then they actually need to go where the work is. One of the things I advocate is that we should have a Tinder for jobs, a much more efficient system for young people who are semi-skilled or even have a particular skill to move around the country and to work in those areas. And indeed, if that means that they live in, fancy or whatever tier of mobile home, they can navigate around natural hazards, they can move to where the work is, and of course, they're going to be more active consumers in some sense, in that they are not owners of a traditional home and therefore not saddled with that debt. And I do think there is this transformation going on. Am I talking about hundreds of millions of people? Of course not. But is it a growing trend? Yes.
And the real estate implication would be that if they are truly mobile like that, they need to park their vehicle someplace in either a rental or a lease. Right, Daryl? I'm sure Redfin probably handles manufactured home communities, which are sort of like that, not quite.
We have some of them on our website, but we don't broker them.
Yeah. So okay, so that was mobile real estate. So thank you, Parag, for taking that one on. Also, Parag, you mentioned the urban wealth fund approach to help. Back to Daryl's point, I asked Daryl about incentives. How do we incentivize people to move out of harm's way? Can you just share a little bit about what an urban wealth fund is?
Absolutely, and this gets to the point about the kind of fiscal fragmentation in terms of how, whether it's climate adaptation or other real estate market adaptation, is going to play out in lacking a multi-trillion-dollar package, and that is that cities are sitting on these public assets, unused land that they could lease for commercial purposes and generate substantial revenue from, and use that to invest in the necessary affordable housing or other infrastructures that they need. And according to the economist Dag Detter from Sweden, who's done a lot of work around the world looking at the possibility of urban wealth funds, he identifies the U.S. alone as having tens of trillions of dollars of untapped assets. He started to work with a couple of cities in the United States that are a bit more progressive around this in order to raise that capital to invest in their own upgrade and modernization. So I think an urban wealth funds across the country would be a very sensible move.
Daryl, has Redfin, two questions. Does Redfin transact land deals only, or is there always a structure involved?
Sometimes we do land.
Yeah.
So if you look on Redfin, you'll see both land, you'll see new construction where the home hasn't actually been built, it's just plans, and then we sell existing homes too.
And potentially the client is a government agency in some cases?
In
occasionally?
some cases, we do a bit of REO, which is like essentially homes that are in distress where the government will get involved and then resell it.
Yeah. So thank you for this. This is a rich conversation, and it will continue to unfold. But a final question from both of you: for the visionary real estate developer or owner or investor, what would they do to prepare for these fundamental changes, other than going to the Redfin site and Daryl, reading the research that your team is doing, Parag, first of all reading your books and then looking at ClimateAlpha, but what should an informed real estate person be thinking about in order to prepare for this tremendous shift that's going to happen? Daryl?
I think that investors kind of have to be of two minds. There are the patterns we're seeing where people are moving today. And then if you're thinking about more long-term investments, you want to think about where are people going to want to move 10 years from now. And whether you're doing a short-term real estate investment, you could just follow the people to Arizona and to Austin and make your buildings as resistant to the heat and drought as you possibly can. Or you can plan ahead and think, maybe it's going to be Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota that people are going to want to move to. At least from some of the models I've seen, those seem to be a bit more resilient than at least the South.
Yeah, thank you. Parag?
Let me echo that, and I think again, as you to take up your challenge, the visionary real estate developer is going to be saying, okay, how can we not only choose the right geographies based upon the models that are available to us, such as again, northern states and so forth, but also how do we design our settlements to be more self-sufficient, to be more circular? And Steve, in your sessions and many of your other speakers, have pointed to these out. We have to amalgamate these lessons into products. I would call them like climate oases, which is to say settlements where you have self-sufficient energy, so you've got a higher quotient of solar or geothermal or other energy sources, wind. You are doing hydroponic and aquaponic agriculture for local self-sufficiency. You're doing wastewater treatment and recycling, and all of these technologies are there. We know that different parts of the real estate industry are using them. We need to combine them into full service kinds of communities, if you will. And I think that's how you overall develop a more resilient set of communities, more resilient society.
That's great. There will be new product types. In fact, we just saw the announcement of the Tesla master planned community outside of Austin. Also, Whisper Valley is down there. They're building it in an area that's going to be a lot of work because it's going to get hotter and drier. But nonetheless, I think we will see product types to reflect these strategies. So thank you, Dr. Daryl Fairweather, Chief Economist at Redfin. Be sure to go to the website and read her work. And Dr. Parag Khanna, our good friend and supporter, also the author of Move, The Forces Uprooting Us, which releases pretty soon, right, Parag?
October.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you both, and be safe, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.